not me. I'm not talking. Andy just like.
Technically, you're still talking.
Stop talking.
Okay, so I can start. So I would prepare for meetings by going through the list on the board packet of what you should do to prepare for that meeting. I think that is a really good place to start. It has a lot of important information and it lists, what to do with each piece of information that's in the board packet. I think that there's other work to do to get into a space where you can be prepared to fully participate for 3 or 4 hours. And it's certainly really helpful, for me at least, to make notes about my initial perceptions of each item on the board packet as I was going through them. But I think that was a really good place to start.
So practically, have a good dinner beforehand because it's a long meeting. You're going to get hungry in the middle of it. I would agree with all that and also add find what works for you in terms of preparing for a meeting and understanding proposals, but understanding them is critical, whether that means taking notes or reading through them or rereading them, whatever works for you and your learning style. The other thing that I would add would be to look at it with a really critical lens. So we need to try to be really critical of all these proposals so that we can make them the best they can be. And I think that's tough for me and probably some of you to come at something with a really critical point of view, but to try to put yourself in those shoes to really try to poke holes in it and find out how we can improve it.
For me, just read the board packet. It'll say in the front the directions, what you're supposed to read. You should, what you're supposed to do to prepare. Just do all that. Do what these people just said too.
Yeah, that's a good rule in general.
It's a good suggestion. So starting with Elena this time, how did you handle relating your board activities to your house and vice versa?
I was kind of bad at that. But I some of the more recent board meetings, they'd have people who would write up a house report, and so I would forward them that. And at house meetings, I'd try and recap what would go on. and your post board packet, on a bulletin board or whatever, visible too. That's really important, so that if they're interested, they can talk to you about it. But ideally, you should be communicating with them about the things that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, I always had an officer report at a house meeting, try to really quickly summarize things. Sometimes you'll have to go ask your house's opinion on something, or you should. We did that for scholarships. For example, if something particularly applies to your house, there were some financial things a couple years ago that really applied to Escher House specifically. So we had to take those things directly to the house and give the house's opinion and get the house's feedback. And the more you can do that, the better, because of all the extra brains in the ICC can really help improve the proposal if you can find someone else to find something to improve on it.
Yeah, during my officer report to the House, I would try and list as briefly as possible pretty much everything that we had discussed at our recent board meeting so that people at least have an opportunity to say, wait, that sounds interesting, please expand on that. But I would usually pick the 1 to 3 things that were really relevant to the House from that week's board meeting and from the most recent board meeting. And I would try to explain why those were relevant and go into more detail about those. When I did have to do votes at the House to gauge opinion, I did try to make it clear that we weren't voting on how I was going to vote, because I think that was a misconception that people had early on. So after the first time I did that, I made it clear I want to get your opinion is valuable, but if I think that I have to vote my conscience, I have to vote what I think is going to be best for the ICC. In terms of relating things from my house to the board, I don't think that's as much of a challenge, but I think, I in particular at least, think Black Elk's really awesome and we do all sorts of cool social things. So I was really tempted to share every little thing, and especially later on in my period as a board rep, I tried to pare it down to things that were really relevant to things that were happening in the House. So not every time the House went out as a group, but if it was because a member was leaving, then I would mention that and say, and we're keeping an eye on how the dynamics of the House are changing. So trying to keep it relevant, it's good to share just little things, but you can't share every single thing.
So, being on the board, of course, as Emily mentioned before, a good chunk of your time is spent not just in board meetings, but in your committee meetings and doing committee work. So, how did you balance your committee work with your overall work on the board, Emily?
So I think it's not too difficult, but I think one thing, but because they're separate times, and a lot of the time that you spend outside of board meetings, working on ICC things would be your committee work. It's just how it works out. One thing that I found to be something of a challenge maybe was participating as a committee member at board meetings. When we were talking about things that I had some amount of expertise in because we discussed them as a committee, you know, it was a little bit of a challenge at first for me to sort of put that hat on and take on that role. But I think in general it's not too difficult because, you know, you really start to understand what your committee is doing and it just feels natural. And then the board meetings are a good place where it all sort of comes together and you get to see what everyone's doing.
I haven't ever actually sat on a committee. I've only ever been a team chair. So my experience is a little bit different, and I was really fortunate in the fact that I was really, really engaged in what my team, like what the team was doing. So I didn't really I wanted to really work on that. So I guess I was lucky. I didn't have to worry about balancing with other commitments or anything. So I don't really have a good answer.
Yeah, I'm similar. I was on the education committee, and I felt like everything we did was pretty easy and self-explanatory. So I just showed up. So all the things. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's it.
Great.
Yeah.
And one thing with two of our reps here, Emily and Eric, came in the middle of a term. So you know, because we're starting at the beginning.
Yeah, I did too.
Oh, okay. Oh, so all three of us. Yeah. So we have these trainings, these formal trainings in spring at the beginning of spring semester, and then there's a board retreat in the beginning of the fall semester. But many times for reasons, for multitude of reasons, people need to drop out and then be replaced. And so there's not necessarily as much of a structure for this sort of, we can't meet like this every month, for instance. So I'd like to ask, from their experience, what are some things that people who are sitting on the board when a new board member arrives, what are some things that they can do to help out those new members? Or what are some things that might have been helpful for you? Or some things that people did that helped you out?
Sure. So I think I was lucky enough to get makeup training from Ian Cross, the then president of the ICC. He explained consensus and a lot of things about how to participate in meetings. One thing I didn't feel confident doing early on was actually using that information and participating in meetings. I was really hesitant to speak up. I thought sort of that, I don't understand as much as everyone else, so, I shouldn't be asking questions or making assertions and things like that. And one thing that current board reps did, and I would encourage you to do, is really encourage people to speak up. Because, as I think you'll discover, it is very easy to settle into a pattern of the same people talking very frequently, which is great because they're probably very knowledgeable, but it's always welcome to have someone who doesn't speak as much, take their turn. And I particularly noticed this when we had we recently, at one of the last two board meetings, had a substitute board rep come in, and she made a lot of comments. And I really appreciated that she was confident enough to speak up that much because she had great insights and, asked great questions that I think we don't often think about the answers to. So just, I would say, even during the meeting, just whispering to them if they're sitting next to you, hey, I'm sure everyone would really love to hear your opinion about this because it's true. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree that we definitely want to hear everyone's opinion. Even if you don't know exactly when you're supposed to say it, we're much more about you giving us your opinion, and we can help you about when the appropriate time is. I think some people last semester did a really good job of just making sure we re-explain things every time, even if we don't have anybody new. Make sure we're really clear with explaining things, making really open to asking questions. One thing that I had a little bit difficulty with when I came in the February timeframe was there was already kind of a social structure during break time and stuff, and it would always we kind of go on a break time, and then they would all hang out because they're all friends, and I'd kind of just eat. So I guess please make sure you're including the new people in the social aspect of this as well. I like eating though, so it's okay.
I would say what was helpful for me is the board rep before me helped me fill me in on what was the recent proposals, what they were, and how to what consensus was. So I was a bit overwhelmed by like the whole board packet. So I'm like, what is this? But yeah, that's it.
So finally, just one last round of advice. So what's one piece of advice that you have? I mean, you've already given quite a bit, and thank you for that. But just one piece of advice you have for the incoming reps. We'll start with you, Elena.
Find like a little thing to be curious about. And like if it's like one proposal or something, and just try and I mean, you don't have to chime in immediately for if especially if you're don't like to chime in for meetings, but just try pay attention, I guess, would be a good start, and then just chime in or whatever. Yeah, just follow your intuition, I guess. But yeah.
Have some fun. One of the best things about this job is that you meet someone from every house, and now you have a friend in every single house. So utilize those connections and have some fun and enjoy meeting new people.
Yeah, I would say come to meetings with an idea of one thing that you want to express. Because I think it's too easy, especially early on, to come to a meeting and give your house report and then be silent the entire rest of the time, which is really unfortunate. So, have one thing you want to say, and if someone else says it, that's fine, twinkle them, but, be prepared to speak up next board meeting. And also don't take it too seriously. You come in and see everyone around the tables, and it seems pretty formal, but the structure we have is just to make sure that all the fun we're having doesn't derail the serious work that we're doing. It's still worthwhile to have fun, and no one's going to be mad at you for, speaking up or anything.
Great. Well, thank you all for that. Are there any questions for our panelists before we move forward? I know it's the end of a nearing the end of a long day, so.
That was so helpful, I was really
yeah.
engaged.
Yeah, so I can't speak for them, but I will anyway. I'm sure that, if you have further questions, maybe approach these folks at a board meeting, approach some of the, the more experienced people around you, and, kind of make those social connections that can really help. But so thank you to our panelists for taking your time.
Yeah. Woohoo! Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to whoever turns on the projector.